Hey, this is Brian with worshiptutorials.com. I'd love to introduce you to a special guest here who will be sort of a common fixture here at Worship Tutorials. This is Pastor Brian Fuller.
What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
We just refer to Fuller as Fuller. And Pastor Fuller is the global arts worship pastor at the church where we lead worship at New Hope Church. So he's sort of in charge of all of the campus worship. And I brought Fuller on board because every time we get into a room, the worship leaders and the creative staff at New Hope Church, and Pastor Fuller, he mentors us and he leads us, and we'll start talking about a topic when it comes to leading worship. And I always sit back and say, you know, this is the stuff that makes great worship, that really is what great worship leaders do, but that nobody ever tells you. So I wanted to just share that knowledge with you today. So this is going to be sort of a common video series. We don't have a name for it yet, but we will probably try and brand it sometime in the future. But this is for you, worship leaders. We're just going to take topics and we're going to talk about them just sort of conversationally. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We're going to eventually do some of these things live, which will allow you to interact with us. But today we're going to be talking about audience or congregational engagement. How do we get, as worship leaders, worship teams, how do we get people engaged in what's happening? Fuller?
Awesome.
What are your thoughts?
Well, man, Brian, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on Worship Tutorials. It's an honor. And by all means, I am not the expert in this field. I'm just a worship leader that's asking the same questions a lot. And first of all, I would just say to you worship leaders who are even asking the question, great job. Because I think so many times as worship leaders, we get so caught up in what we're doing that we forget the whole reason we're leading worship is so that people can experience worship. People can experience Jesus. So if you find yourself asking, how do I engage people? How do I engage my congregation? Why aren't they singing? Why aren't they clapping? That's a good first step, because I think, first of all, just being aware of that is extremely important.
Yeah. All right. So how then do we define audience or congregational engagement? What does it look like?
We have to ask ourselves the question, what is engagement? What exactly are we looking for? Because most of us have probably played in bands at some point, you know, in either a secular market or, you know, some sort of coffee house experience. And so we kind of measure engagement just from our people and do they look like they're enjoying themselves. So we do have to define what engagement is, because otherwise we may be looking for something that's not really not there, and B, not even really supposed to be there. So we have to decide what it means when people are engaged, and it's different for everybody. Some people don't like to sing, so we're asking them to do something that they don't really like doing. I mean, how many times as a worship leader we're like, all right guys, let's sing it together, and nobody sings it.
That happens often.
Yeah, so we're thinking, why aren't you singing the song? Well, the truth is this, I mean, you're asking a guy who just worked 75 hours, an electrician, who has never sang in his life, right, and now all of a sudden on Sunday you expect him to just sing out a verse and a chorus of the latest Hillsong. And so we have to really ask ourselves, what does engagement look like? Otherwise, we can get really frustrated as worship leaders, and we can spend our whole lives going, they just don't like me, or what I'm doing is not working. And so I think really identifying what engagement is very important.
I give you a personal example. So when I lead, obviously I sing, and I'm engaged most of the time. But when I'm not leading, I am often the guy with my hands in my pockets. And I tell this to my team a lot. I say to my teams, you know, if you look and somebody and they're not engaged on their face, it doesn't mean that they're not engaged in their spirit, in their mind. Because some people are just like that. Some people just kind of stand there and watch. But it doesn't mean they're not engaged. So I would say don't be discouraged if you see a person not singing, not physically engaged.
Yeah, I'll give you another example. My wife and I, about a year ago, went to a Bon Jovi concert.
All right.
They were in town, and we got free tickets. Thought, what the heck? And so my wife she's like, you know, she's not a musician at all, so she's here jamming, bouncing around all these songs she heard when she was in high school and college, and I'm sitting here like this. And I'm having the time of my life.
Yeah.
And she's looking at me going, are you enjoying yourself? I'm like, yeah. And so the engagement was different for each of us. For her, it was jumping up, celebrating, singing all these songs that she used to know. And then for me, it was evaluating the band. How tight are they? You know, what songs are they doing? So it was a different experience. So Bon Jovi could have looked at me and go, well, the dude's not really enjoying himself, but that lady seems to be having a good time. So you have to know what engagement really means. And when you're talking about a congregation, you're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands even, of people that are all different, that are all from different places, different walks in lives, different preferences, different styles. Some of them like pop, some of them like rock, some of them like blues. So it's kind of unrealistic to think that engagement would simply be everyone raising their hands and singing and clapping, because the truth is most people don't do that. Some people will, because that's what they enjoy and that's what they do, but you can't look at the whole and expect that from everyone, and if we do, that's not really engagement. And so you have to understand everybody's level of engagement is going to look different. You know, and you may not even figure that out, but you can get to a point where your congregation, you kind of know when they're engaged and when they're not. You can tell when the other extreme, you can tell when people aren't engaged. They're checking their watches, they got their hands over their ears, they're looking at the bulletin, they're texting. Okay, that's pretty safe to say they're not engaged. But that doesn't mean they're not engaged because of what you're doing. There could be something going on in their life. So I think as a whole, you have to just assume in a room full of a couple hundred people, our goal is to get a lot of them engaged in worship. But certainly human nature is going to dictate that some of them won't be. Right. And that's okay. Once we identify what engagement looks like, because you hit it right on the head, Brian. First of all, you know, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said, never compare your life to someone else's highlight reel.
Yes.
Because that happens so many times.
That's a social media thing.
Yeah, so it happens so many times. We watch the latest live conference from Hillsong, and we're like, why can't our Sunday be like that? Right. Well, that's not a good sample of what life is really like. Right. Anytime you go to a worship conference, the engagement's going to be higher because the people who are there to engage in worship, and they've spent money and they've made investments in time, and they're there because they want to do that. But a lot of times in churches, like I said, it might be some guy who, this is his first time ever at church. Right. You have to consider this. I doubt that at a Hillsong conference in New York, there are a lot of people that have no idea who Hillsong is. Right. You know, they're fans of Hillsong, and so you have to really consider that. And then once you figure that out, which is really important, and I would also say that you don't have to figure this out on your own. You have other team members. You have obviously your senior pastor is I know for me, if I'm feeling a certain way about a certain Sunday, I'll ask Pastor Benji, hey, what did you think about today? How did you feel? Because there are some days where I go, man, I just feel like people were not engaged. And my pastor will say, I thought they were heavily engaged today. Yeah. And so sometimes you might just be having a bad day. But I do think it's important to come up with kind of a consistent expectation for yourself. What's realistic? What can I expect? And then you can kind of go from there. Maybe it was a little less than I expected. Maybe it was a little more than I expected. But I do think it's important to expect something and be realistic for what it is you're expecting. I think to expect to walk in on a Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and start a service and expect everybody right after they got out of their car and put their kids in children's ministry and maybe grabbed a coffee and then stumbled into the service that they were thinking about sleeping in anyways, to suddenly at the top of their lungs sing Alive by Hillsong and dance to all these synth parts. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic when you think about it. But if you go through the entire service and you see no engagement, then I think that's important to address that and go, hey, are there things we're doing that are getting in the way of people engaging? And I think that's where you start to kind of transition into how can we make them more engaged, and what are some things we can do to increase the engagement.
Here's another question then. Sure. So what is it that we want people to be engaged in?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I mean, the truth is this. Most of us who are leading worship are diehard musicians or want to be diehard musicians. We're passionate about music. We're passionate about the latest trends. We're passionate about everything that's happening in worship. We can sometimes get caught up and forget what we're actually supposed to be doing. Right. And I think a lot of times what happens is what we think when we talk about engagement, why aren't people singing? Why aren't people clapping? Sometimes we lose sight of this question. What do we want them engaged in? Who do we want them? I think is an even better question. Who do we want them engaged in?
Right.
Do we want the audience or the congregation engaged in us because we're cool and we've been working on our guitar tone and our acoustic strings are new and we got click tracks and we're rocking and this is the baddest, newest song and we got it worked out and we practiced it and we got all the riffs and people aren't engaged, so now we're like, why aren't they engaged? But it's more of like, I want them engaged because I've put all this work into this and this is special and this is good and this is fresh. I just wish people would see how cool this is.
Yes.
And that's not why we do worship.
No.
I mean, I think there's a human nature to be appreciated, and that's fine, and it can drive you to excellence. Yeah. But the truth is, in a worship environment, what we really want them engaged in is Jesus. Yeah. We want people connecting in worship. I mean, that's our role. We're worship leaders. We are leading people in worship. And if they're not engaging in Jesus and who God is, what's the point?
Right.
Otherwise, they should just buy a ticket and go see a concert of some band they like.
Bon Jovi.
And, Bon Jovi, exactly. And so there's this parameter of reminding ourselves, what do we want them engaged in? And I think once you move the focus off of, forget about, oh, we want them grooving because the song is funky, right, or we want them weeping because these string patches are killer. It's really looking at it and going, are they being moved because of an encounter with Jesus? Because I've seen the most broken down, small scale worship environments where it's like a guy and his guitar, barely singing in key. Yeah. And I see hundreds and thousands of people engaged because this person is leading them to Jesus. And that's where the engagement really happens, because we have to acknowledge the fact that people are not going to engage in worship without a movement of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. Our awesome band is not going to move people to engage in worshiping Jesus. Only the Holy Spirit's going to do that. So we have to create environments where the Holy Spirit is moving. The Holy Spirit is present in our environments and facilitate then this true engagement of worship, which could often be solemnness. It could be tears. It could be quiet. Yeah. It could be a hand raised. It could be eyes closed. It could be so many different. It could be jumping up and down. It could be dancing around. It could be a lot of different things. But you know it when it's happening.
Right. And to that point, I just want to encourage some of you. I know a lot of you are probably watching this in very small churches, and I led worship in very small churches for a long time. And so, I've been a part of leading worship at New Hope when we put on a leadership conference, and there's hundreds of pastors and worship leaders in the room, and engagement is super high because they've come expecting to engage and encounter Jesus. But I also, for a couple years at New Hope, we have a prison ministry, and I went into a women's prison and I led worship. It was just me and a guitar and a terrible sound system.
Terrible. And that's an overstatement. You're being generous.
I am being generous.
Yeah.
But it was like a couple hundred female prisoners, and the engagement that happened there is probably greater than
through the roof.
any church setting I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
So just an encouragement to you. You can get engagement with high production. Yeah. Big huge rooms full of people, but the Holy Spirit works just as effectively through one guy and a guitar who can't hear himself singing through the PA, and a room full of people who have come ready to encounter the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So
that's great.
On that note, what do we do as worship leaders, as worship teams, to foster that in our congregation, to encourage an encounter with the Holy Spirit? What are things that maybe we're not doing that we should do, and what are things that maybe we are that most of us are doing?
Sure.
That we need to stop doing.
Yeah.
Because I think both of those things probably exist for almost all of us.
Yeah, that's great, Brian. And those are all great questions. And I think this is where we really have to look at ourselves and go, what can I control and what can I control? There are some things that we cannot control, and there are some things that we can control. One of the things that we can control, for the most part, is ourselves. Yeah. Why in the world would I expect somebody to be engaged in something that I'm doing if I'm not personally engaged? And I'm talking about a deep engagement. I'm talking about when you step on that stage as a worship leader, even if it's for 4 people, does your heart sink when you see there's 4 people? Do you say to yourself, man, there's only 4 people, I wish there were more people here? Right. Because if that's the case, then you're already losing engagement. You have to remember at the end of the day, we're on the stage for one reason, to engage people in Jesus. So we have to make sure that we are critically prepared, that we are fully engaged, because people are not going to do anything that we're not doing.
Right.
And people can sense it when you're not engaged.
Right.
They can tell when you don't care or when you're winging it. I see this a lot. I've been guilty of this. Like, there's certain Sundays that roll around and you kind of, time got away from you, your project list got away from you, and you're just kind of showing up going, man, I hope this comes together. You know, and so there's this realistic thing that's happening that starts with me. What am I engaged? Am I fully engaged, not only in the music, not only in the words that I'm singing, but am I fully bought into what I'm about to do? Am I fully bought in? Am I fully expecting Jesus Christ to make his name known through what I'm about to do? And if we are sold out for that and we are engaged, that'll be the first obstacle that's removed.
Yeah.
The other thing is, chances are, I mean, most of us probably have other people on stage with us.
Right.
Either another instrumentalist or a vocalist. And so beyond us, now it's, are they engaged? I've seen this happen way too many times. You got this worship leader who's incredible. You're probably one of them. You're this worship leader and you're just sold out and you're passionate, and your other guitar player is just standing there looking like he wants to kill somebody. Or a vocalist is sitting there kind of, they're not singing, so they're just kind of off in the distance. Your engagement level is going to go phew. So we have to make sure everyone on stage is engaged. So it starts with us, but then now as the worship leader, I'm responsible for everyone on stage. When you watch a great worship team like Bethel or Hillsong or Israel, you look at anyone on that stage and they are fully engaged.
Yeah.
Especially when they're not doing something. You'll see Hillsong where you'll see Joel Houston leading a song, and you'll see Marty Sampson or somebody in the back not doing anything but fully engaged in worship. And that's why when you pan out, you see 30,000 people fully engaged in worship. Right. You've seen videos, I'm sure, on YouTube where there's somebody rocking and then everyone on the stage just looks like they ate an onion sandwich. And the congregation's all sitting here like this. Because there's no engagement. So we have to be realistic with ourselves and saying, are we leading the way with this engagement, or are we just expecting something from people that we're not willing to give them? That is critical. That is important. And that's something we can control.
Yeah. I think you should tell your teams two things. One, somebody is always watching you. Always.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing. Somebody in your congregation is watching you. And two, what you're doing on stage tells them what's appropriate for worship in your church.
Yeah, that's good.
So if you're bored, I'm not saying if you are bored, if you look bored.
If you look bored, yeah.
Because those are two different things.
Oh, yeah.
If you look bored, you're telling people, hey, it's cool if you're bored.
Yeah.
Because I am. Even though you may not be.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They say, never let them see you sweat.
That's right.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it.
That's right.
So once we've figured out that we're engaged and the people that are on stage with us are engaged, I think the next critical piece is to assess the environment. What kind of environment are we creating? Are we creating an environment that's allowing people to be engaged? Is it a safe environment? Is it a place where people can kind of just get into what we're doing with limited distractions? It's kind of like, you ever go to the library, one of the biggest rules in the library is everyone's got to be quiet, right? And why is that? Because people are engaged in reading. And if there's a lot of noise and if there's a lot of stuff going on in the library, it becomes a distraction. And now people cannot be engaged any longer in what they were engaged in. It's the same with worship. I was in a band in college. We did a show at a coffee house, and it was like an unplugged show. And it was like when Frappuccinos were like becoming the big thing. So we'd be like in the middle of like this acoustic song, and I'd be like getting ready to sing a verse like and it was louder than the entire band. And this happened all night long. I know. And you talk about ruining a moment.
Yes.
And so that was one of those situations where it's like the environment wasn't right for engagement. It was a great environment for getting awesome coffee drinks. But for listening to an intimate band, not really a good environment. And so assessing the environment is critical. And that also means assessing who's in the room. Who is in the room? It's kind of like if I went to do let's say I got invited to do worship at an old folks home.
Yes.
And it was, I was just going to go there and serve them and do some worship songs and just give them some worship. And everyone in this room is 75 plus, most of them with medical conditions. Like, I'm not going to pull out the Marshall stack and the synthesizers and do a Live in Us and be like, hey, why isn't everybody jumping around? Right. It's absurd, isn't it? It's absurd to expect that. It's like you never go to a 5-year-old's birthday party and AC/DC's playing in the backyard. No. It's absurd. And so you have to know the environment. And I think every Sunday you have to assess the environment and your demographic. Maybe you're from a town. Maybe you lead worship at a church that's very traditional. I mean, the truth is this. The latest, greatest, young and free is probably not going to work there. It's just not who they are. Right. And so sometimes we try to push who we are on the congregation, and that's kind of when we have to step back and go, well, that's why people aren't engaged, because this is not going to engage them. So figuring out who your audience is and what they need spiritually to be able to engage. Go back to that same old folks home. I'm doing just me and my acoustic and some old classic hymns. Right. It's the best thing that's ever happened. Nice. They got their hands raised, they're singing the wrong words, they're singing out of key. It's a beautiful experience, and everyone's really doing what ultimately was the purpose, was to worship Jesus. Right. And so now why I'm not, working on my latest acoustic hymn album, because that's what I love. That's what the room required. And as worship leaders, we have to give the room what it requires if we really want people to experience Jesus in that way. And if you feel like you can't be who you are in your environment, then maybe you're in the wrong environment. Right. Maybe there's a better environment for you. So doing songs that people know is the number one way to get engagement. And the truth is this: if you lead worship every Sunday, you are probably sick of some of the best worship songs alive. Yes. But the truth is this: just because we're sick of them doesn't mean that everyone else is. And I would argue to say that most people don't even come to church every week. No. So if you do a song every 3 weeks for the entire year, for one, you're only doing it a third of what you think. And then for two, you might be doing multiple services. Yeah. So you've heard the song twice today, plus rehearsal, plus the 2 hours you spent practicing. So you've heard the song 20 times. Yeah. Some guy who was on spring break and then he missed a week because of work, he comes one time in 2 months, and now this is the first time he's ever heard the song that you're sick of. Right. And so we think that all these songs, people know them, but they really don't. They're still new songs. Most people don't drive around in their car listening to Hillsong. No. Unless they're worship fanatics like us. And so we got to keep that in mind when we're picking songs. Pick songs people know. Just because you're sick of them, because what will happen is right when you're starting to get sick of them, the congregation's probably going, hey, I really like this song. And I know this one. And when you do songs people know, they'll sing, they'll clap, they'll raise their hands and all that stuff. So that's a critical piece. As musicians, I know we want to do the new stuff, but do you really want to learn a new song this week? Ask yourself that question. Unless your pastor said, hey, let's do this song. Yeah. Do songs you already know. And it increases your engagement. I love doing songs that I can sing in my sleep. Because I hear something pop out of a lyric that I didn't hear before. I know the chords. I can do a breakdown and, hey, let's sing that chorus a cappella or whatever it is. There's so much freedom in this familiarity, and congregation will engage. It's like if you're driving around and you hear a song on the radio for the first time, you're not singing it. Right. You might like it, but you have no idea what's happening. So that's really important.
One thing that I believe strongly in is to foster engagement in your room is to be authentic with people, because if you're a stranger to people, it's going to be hard for them to follow you.
That's good.
So there's three things that I would encourage on this deal. One, be as personal and as authentic as you can, as you comfortably can, and what's appropriate between you and your pastor from stage. You don't have, as a worship leader, you don't have a lot of moments to be a person. You have a lot of moments to be a musician.
That's right.
But you don't have a lot of time to be a human being that people can connect with. You have times when you pray, and you probably have maybe 15, 20 seconds worth of time, maybe 30, if you plan it in, to lead spiritually where you're not singing. In those times, make sure that you are being yourself and that you are being authentic. Because people can see, if you're saying the same things every single week, and I say this because this happens to me, you need to not do that anymore.
That's good.
Because you're not being yourself. And if people can understand that, hey, this is a guy or a girl up there that is a person that struggles with the same things I do, we're all in this thing together. They're going to be way more inclined to go where you're taking them. Another thing is, and I do this a lot, I think this is huge. If there are people in your congregation that engage, I did this just this past weekend, and you should see the looks on these people's faces when you do this. If people are engaged in your congregation, like if there's a guy or a family that every time they show up, they're singing they're singing their voices out and their hands are up, and they're just super engaged. Just find them after the service, introduce yourself,
that's good,
and say to them something just as simple as, hey, I notice every weekend you're here and you are just super engaged in the worship, and I just want you to know I appreciate that, and it encourages me and our team, and you can't believe what that'll do for people. One, it will just, their faces light up, and it's just an encouragement to them. But two, they're going to engage even more from now on, and that is contagious.
And it'll spread,
That is contagious. You need to create worship leaders in your congregation, and they will lead people alongside you. And just a sentence saying to them, I really appreciate the way you worship. It really encourages me. That's huge. And that'll go a long way.
Yeah, there's a book called Worship Leaders Are Not Rock Stars.
Yeah.
And that's a really good book if you're looking along these lines, because people want to know you. People, if you're expecting them to engage in this intimate thing called worship, they want to know who you are. They want to be able to trust you, and they want to know that you're real. And I think there's nothing better than after a service or before a service just going in the lobby and meeting new people. I love it when I get a chance to meet a person in the lobby before service, and they have no idea who I am, and it's so cool to have this real, authentic relationship with them, and then they suddenly see me on stage, and it's a whole different experience. Now they're like, oh, that's that guy I was talking to. There's this human element that we overlook. If you just lead your worship team and then all you guys go to the back and wait till the service is over, you're almost like being a rock star, and that doesn't work. You got to be a human being. You got to be a worship leader. People want to know you, and once they know you and trust you, they'll sing, and they'll clap their hands, and they'll worship. One thing I think that we overlook sometimes is the basic surrounding environment that we can control. Again, fluorescent lighting. Like, one of the things that I'm super passionate about here at New Hope, the church that I serve at, is we really desire for our worship experiences to be loud and crazy, but also very intimate. And one of the things I've discovered is that most people who are between the ages of, let's say 15 to 60, operate better and engage better and reflect better when they're in an environment that feels safe and that feels nobody's watching them. And so what we do, I have kind of a rule. If people aren't super engaged, let's turn the house lights down a little bit, because maybe people are they don't feel safe. And so I know for me, when I was first coming up in worship and I saw people raising their hands and stuff, I just felt weird. But I did find a church that was a little bit more dimly lit, if you will. It wasn't like you could see everybody. You could see people next to you, but across the auditorium, it was just kind of faded into shadows. And it did this psychological thing to me that helped me feel safe, so I could start to experiment with expressing myself in worship. And once you start experimenting, expressing yourself, then you become, the kind of worshiper. I could be on a mountain in broad daylight worshiping Jesus because that's who I am. But for a lot of people, they're just not there. And so lighting is critical. Really working with your pastor on, hey, could we change the lighting? Could we make this environment a little better? When you go to the dentist or the doctor or anything like that, one of the most critical pieces of the waiting room is the environment. Does it make a person feel like, all right, this is going to be okay, or this is really going to hurt? And so they spend money on aquariums and trees and plants and cool hanging light fixtures so that it calms people before what they're about to experience. And I think that applies to human nature. And just because we're a church, we shouldn't rule that out. We don't want to go crazy with it to the point where we're trying to manipulate people, but I think there's something to be said for giving people a safe environment. Another very practical thing, and this is always a hot topic, but music stands.
Wait. Okay. Every time I've ever mentioned music stands. And let's just be upfront.
It's like the Scarlet Letter.
Pastor Fuller and I are vehemently opposed to music stands on stage.
For the most part, yes.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Now, if you're leading an orchestra,
Yeah.
maybe they should.
There are a few exceptions, yeah.
But, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay, let's do
I
it.
strongly disagree with you.
About the music stands?
Yes.
Oh, you can be wrong.
But that's what everyone says.
Yes.
I strongly disagree with you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Though when you ask why, that usually it's because
but
I use a music stand.
Yeah, so
or that church uses music stands.
I'm sure they do. I've seen some videos where they do.
And maybe they need to.
Yeah, you know what? And
they have their own reasons.
Yeah, and they do. And I think that this is one of those areas where you have to decide what works for you.
Yeah.
Here's what I know. When I got to the church I was at, everybody was using music stands, and I hated it because I came from a church where we didn't use music stands. To me, it's so awkward to see, especially the front person, the main guy, like the guy who's my pastor, the guy who's leading me in worship, who's telling me about how all week God's been speaking to him about this song, but yet he needs a music stand to get the first line. I go, really, God's been speaking to you all week about this, but you don't know the song yet?
Right.
And so, maybe that's me, I'm super critical, and I'm not saying that's you, and that everyone who uses a music stand does that. I'm just saying a music stand is literally a physical thing that separates you, the worship leader, from me, the congregation. And anytime we put something in between us, it's going to create more distance, because the stage is enough. Just because you're on the stage separates us. So now we got to overcome that obstacle. Right. We have to say, hey, I know I'm on stage, but we're part of this together. We're a family, and I've got a microphone, and I can talk louder than you, and you can say whatever you want, and I probably can't hear you. And so there's all these obstacles, and to me, a music stand is one more obstacle that says, hey, this is in between me and you. But I do think every person's different. A lot of the common reasons I hear for using music stands are all things that I feel like are crutches. Yeah. Like, we can't memorize the music.
Right.
Which, hey, maybe that's a legitimate concern for some people. Some people with bad memories or something. But I would venture to say if you're a worship leader, you need to learn how to memorize music.
Right.
You need to learn how to do those things from memory.
And you probably have most of it memorized.
Yeah, it becomes a crutch.
You might surprise yourself.
Now, lyrics are a little different. If you're doing a hymn that has 9 verses, that's a little different. And I'll make a cheat sheet and put it on my guitar or something. But again, it's not creating this distance between me and the audience. And the other truth, Brian, really is that all of these worship songs are the same chords.
They are.
I mean, Worship Tutorials is an awesome website to show you how to play 8,000 songs the exact same way. And that's what's awesome, about worship. But, there's little things we have to learn. But I just think a music stand, especially for the worship leader, I think that it's most of the time it's a crutch and we're just afraid to step off. What I do know for a fact is that in 2 ministries I've been a part of, once we've removed the music stands, we have seen much greater engagement.
Yeah.
So I can only speak from the fact that I've seen that work. That doesn't mean that because you use a music stand, you're not going to have an engagement.
Right.
I mean, if Bethel uses music stands, hey, they're Bethel. It works for them.
Yeah.
So the real question, if you're asking me what can I do to increase engagement, I will say kill the music stands. But that doesn't mean that I'm right and you have to do it. I'm just saying, hey, in my experience, it helps. Yeah. I will say this. If you're an orchestral musician and you're reading complex melodies and 85 musicians are all playing exact written parts, that's different.
Right.
That's an appropriate setting, but that's also something you expect. When I go to see U2 in concert, Bono doesn't have a music stand.
No.
If they're playing with the chamber orchestra, they will have music stands. So it's totally normal and common. So when I come to church, if I see a band all with music stands, I'm kind of like, how come every other band I've seen play doesn't do this? So it kind of says we're not prepared. And that's just me.
Well, I think a couple things. When I made the transition from using music stands to not using music stands, one, it was a lot easier than I expected it to be. 2, the connection that I had with people and the Holy Spirit in the room was immeasurably higher. Yeah. Because if you have that there, you're going to look at it. I rarely see people with a music stand that don't look at it.
Well, and Brian, I think the question is not why should we not use music stands? I'd say the question is why should I use it?
Right.
Answer that question. Why should I use it?
Okay.
I would challenge you to write down 5 reasons why you should use it.
Yeah.
And I'd be surprised if one of them wasn't, so I had the lyrics in front of me, or so I had the chords in front of me.
Yeah.
Because if you take those two things away,
what do you need it
what's
for?
the other reason? To hold my iPad?
Right.
But what's your iPad doing? Oh, controlling my in-ear mix? Okay, that's different.
Yeah.
Then figure out a different way to do that. But if you really ask yourself, why should I use it? Like Paul says in the Bible, not everything is bad, but not everything is beneficial either.
Right.
And so I would just challenge you, worship leaders, hey, if you find yourself asking the question, how can I get people to engage more? And you use a music stand, just do an experiment. 1 weekend, say, you know what, I'm not going to use the music stand. Try it out and see.
Yeah.
Come back and email us if we're totally crazy.
Please.
Yeah.
Report.
Yes.
But I'm going to be blunt. If I see music stands, it says, 1, you're not going to engage with me very well.
Yeah.
2, you're not prepared.
Yeah.
And if you push back on that, I would ask you, well, how do you define being prepared? Because I would define being prepared as knowing the songs well enough to not have to read music.
Yeah.
And honestly, as worship leaders, there is so much that we are doing when we lead worship that's not music.
Oh.
Playing guitar or piano or whatever instrument, or if you don't play an instrument, singing, or both of those things, they should be so much on autopilot.
Yes. Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing as a worship, and this is maybe a topic for another video.
Yeah, there's like 5 more videos right here.
What you're doing as a worship leader, there are things that you're doing that are so much more important than the music you're playing.
Yeah.
And it needs to be something that you can just do in your sleep.
Yeah.
So if you're not prepared enough to play the music and sing the song that you have to read the music, then I think you're far from being prepared. And if that hurts a little bit, I'm sorry, I love you, but this will help you become a better worship leader.
Yeah. And the truth is, I've been leading worship for 10 years. There are weekends where I'm not prepared, and I know it. I know I'm not prepared. And that's okay. There are times when life gets busy, but it shouldn't be a reason to fall back on a crutch. So, yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
Let's recap. What are some just practical things we can do as worship leaders and as worship teams to help people engage in our worship services?
Yeah, so we define what engagement is. We decide that we want them really engaged in Jesus.
Yes.
That's the most important thing. We assess our room. We assess who's in the room and what is the best way that we can engage them, whether it be song selection or something that I'm saying. We make sure we're engaged. That's crucial. We make sure that our team's engaged. And we're prepared. And then we try to eliminate any sort of distractions we can. And then from there, the Holy Spirit's going to show up, and we're gonna see engagement.
All right. Thank you, Fuller.
It's my pleasure.
It. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. Looking forward to more of these things.
Hey, we're going to do a lot more of these kinds of videos, and potentially maybe a podcast or something that will come from just the audio portion of this. So if you guys have questions for us as far as what would you like to know about leading worship, I can speak from experience. The first couple jobs that I had leading worship, I got hired, I got to the church, the guy was like, all right, you're leading worship.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, okay, now what do I do?
There's got to be a manual around here somewhere. Yeah.
So if that is you, and I suspect there are many of you out there.
That's right.
Let us know what you want us to cover. And then we'll just come up with things from our own experience that we think these are the things that great worship leaders do. And we'll cover them for you. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.